Tune in for the activation required to make an impact through your purpose at work and in the world. From sales and marketing executive to now an international speaker, life and business coach, and media host, hosted by Melissa D. White, the activation specialist. That's me. We're getting real about personal and professional moments with the world's top leaders and influencers to help you activate your voice and amplify your story. Now, let's get activated. Hello, and welcome back for another episode of the Activation Hour. It's me, your girl, Melissa D., your activation coach and your host for the Activation Hour. We're in our new season now of accepting influence. And so we've been so intentional about going through our list of activation affirmations and bringing you guests that live a life of accepting influence and walking in purpose while using their voice at work and in the world. This week's guest is an exceptional example of that. Suzanne Nadell. Suzanne is currently the news director for WSB TV here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm based. If you're in Atlanta, you certainly know the station and you know the name in her work. Since Suzanne's return to WSB TV in 2019, the station has regained its status as America's #1 news team by leading in ratings against all top 10 markets and stations across the country. The station also brought home 9 Southeast Regional Emmy Awards, including News Excellence in 2021, which means she knows a little bit about using your voice in a powerful way through media. But in my personal time talking with Suzanne and learning about how does she do it, how do you have the boldness, the faith even, to show up at work, be bold in your faith, and if being successful at work isn't enough, she's definitely found her voice in the world as well. She's worked as an executive producer, but now as a new author, anticipating the release of her book, and a blogger where she shares many of her own life thoughts and her inspiration at SuzanneNadell.com. Will you welcome my guest this week to the Activation Hour, Suzanne Nadell. Hello, Susan. Welcome. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Very good. Good to be here.
I'm so excited. We connected just to give some background. I love when social media connections become real connections. And it was, there's a language we live by, like certain words just light up your heart and your spirit, right? And when I saw your profile on Instagram, when you used my buzzwords, like finding your voice and, purpose, and I was like, oh, she's my people. She's it. So, and you were so gracious in saying, absolutely, let's talk, let's connect. And I love when I have the chance to chat with my guests, such as yourself, because that's when you find the real story and the real connection. So I have to ask, you're a pretty incredible lady, as if like your accolades at work weren't enough, you sought a sense of like greater purpose. Tell us about how you're now using your voice at work at WSB TV, but also in the world as an up-and-coming published author and through your blog.
Yeah, finding my purpose and how I'm supposed to use my voice has been such a journey for me. What brought me to news was actually, and what I write a lot about, was the fact that I felt like I couldn't be my full self in a lot of the church circles where I grew up because of my gender. Preacher's kid. I went to a Christian college. It was never even a thought for me to be able to go into leadership in those areas, but I'm wired to lead. So I found my way through news. I loved the storytelling. I loved the adrenaline. I loved the leadership of it. And then as my career would go on, I'm like, but am I being called to other things? And I've had years and years and years of this ongoing kind of debate in my head about Am I supposed to be in the marketplace? Am I supposed to be in the professional world? Am I supposed to leave it and go do other things? And what's interesting is people all along were being like, you're in an amazing place where you can be in both worlds. And I kept on, and sometimes I would get kind of angry when people would say that. I'm like, no, but I should be in the church full time, or I should be doing it in nonprofits full time. Why did I have to go into this other area to be embraced? And it took me a while. Every time I tried to break up with the one, something kept me in it. And I'm like, oh, maybe I am in a unique place to be kind of in both worlds and to use my voice in both worlds. And maybe instead of fighting it, I need to go with the flow. Maybe that's what God's wanting me to do. And I need to kind of follow it instead of fighting it. And it's interesting when you stop fighting the doors God has opened for you, the sense of peace that brings you. And that's still a work in progress for me, but I'm better. I'm in a better place for that than I've ever been. And it's amazing. It's even taken me a while to figure out that's what's brought about the peace, is that I'm not fighting and trying to force my own ideas into it. I'm just following the opportunities and doing it in a way, just living the life God calls us to lead in whatever I do.
I love that. Stop fighting it and follow the opportunities God gives you. Do you think that's why people even struggle to find their voice? Like, because there's an internal fight instead of just going with the flow?
I think sometimes we want to determine what our voice is. And we really have to take a look at what our strengths are, where our desires are. And sometimes I think that could be based on what we were raised, or it could be what we idealized or, wanted to be, or where we thought we were supposed to be based on what we were raised. But I think sometimes the fight is we have ideas in our head that we haven't quite found what our true selves or our true purpose were yet. Can't quite hear your mic.
It's kind of, there we go. It's the battle of profession versus purpose in a way, where oftentimes we're taught, well, work is work, but my life is my life. We're taught to segment, right? And we're taught that church goes in the church box, family goes in the family box, and work goes in the work box, and they don't intersect.
Right.
Do you agree? And then there's a struggle with that.
Yeah, you're you all the time. And, I recently went through an exercise that was basically like, okay, let's lay out what your core values are. And when you're feeling off, whether it be in work, whether it be at church, whether it be at home, it's probably because that area at that time is not aligning with your core values. And your core values don't change wherever you are. Your core values are your core values all the time. So it's about figuring out what your core values are, where your talents lean towards and what's important to you. And when things are off, it's probably because those it's not hitting with those values, or your values were violated somehow, and figuring out what that is and how that then it spreads into the other parts of your life, right? Like if your core value is feeling violated at work, that then seeps into home. And if there wasn't a value there being violated, probably your reaction to what's off in one part is going to seep into another part. And then that impacts your spiritual life and your walk with God and everything. So your areas are intertwined. I'm careful about the work-life balance word. I get it. And it's a big part of me. And I'm a big believer in boundaries, and I've worked on boundaries. But I'm a big believer in, there are times when more goes into one, more goes into another. But at the end of the day, I'm Suzanne Nadell, boss, wife, mom, a daughter of the king wherever I go. And that doesn't change.
Mhm.
It doesn't change where you are. You're the same person wherever you go, and you take those values with you, your core values, wherever you go.
Wow, I love that you mentioned that your core values, and if the value is off in one area, that's like your indicator. It's almost like your spiritual check engine light, I guess you could say, that hey, something over here needs to be tended to. Um, you know, I want to talk about what I call your activation hour, Suzanne. That's the moment when you are at a crossroads and you have a decision to make. And the activation is where, hey, something, an idea or calling something in you is ignited and turned on. It's like, this is my hour to transform. And I want to know what was your activation hour? Was it the book, your blog? Was there something in you that just said, hey, this light in me is turned on and I have to do something with this?
So I've had a couple.
Okay.
And the final one, I think, was an accumulation of a couple and things that happen. In addition to all those things you mentioned when you introduced me, I'm also a 2-time cancer survivor. And each time I had both Hodgkin's, and it's funny, this week is my 10-week anniversary of my Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis and my 4-year anniversary of the test that discovered my breast cancer.
Wow.
And each time I went through the whole cancer battle, I felt this nudge that I was supposed to be doing more.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. Each time I had it, I even wondered if I was supposed to even proceed in my profession. But yet each time I went through my cancer journey, towards the end of it, I was offered a huge promotion. And so I would be in this time of prayer, like, am I supposed to leave? And then I would be offered this huge promotion. I'm like, okay, this is where God wants me to go. And this is where I would go. And I would be happy. Things would be trucking along until they weren't. And I had moved back here to Atlanta shortly after the breast cancer. And things were really stressful for me. Things were, again, my warning lights were going off, as you would say. I was just not in a good place. And I couldn't sleep at night. And I woke up and I went to my laptop. And there is an author, Katie Cole. She is the author of Developing Female Leaders. And I poured my heart out to Katie Cole about how I wanted to write this book. And there are different things I wanted to do. And this is my life story, how I felt like in the faith world, there hadn't been people who were talking to women like me. And within 24 hours, I heard from her assistant. And within 48 hours, I heard from her. We scheduled an appointment with her. And she connected me with her writing consultant. And the book everything just fell into place after that. And it became very clear to me that was something else, that I would not feel like I was answering a call if I did not figure out how to do that as well. And that was just an aha, that sometimes if you just go out on a limb and you just say, this is how it is, the people are there. And I just love the fact it was women who were just like quick to answer and who were there to like support. And this is who you talk to. And every time I'd be like, how's this going to be with work? What should I do? Blah, blah, blah. And they're like, just talk to your bosses. Just talk to them.
That's good.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so good. As I'm listening to one of your activation hours, I'm thinking of those right now, Suzanne, who are returning to work, struggling with profession or being in the office, or hey, like maybe I started this dream or this project or something, during the rough 2 years we've been through, and now they're like, and I hear this a lot. As a coach, we're as a coach, we usher people through transition and finding their voice in our community. And in that moment, like that sage advice of, hey, just talk to your boss. It's easier said than done.
It is.
To say, hey, by the way, I know this is my primary job and my focus, but there's something else that just really lights my fire. And it's not a conflict, I promise. but people struggle to have that conversation. What would you say to someone who is struggling with that, like you, like, I feel like I need to write this book, or I need to pursue this thing, but I love my job too, and I feel like I can do both. What would you say to them?
First, to be honest, I would say for me, I have been with the same company for 20 years. So that's where your relationships, your track record, how you hold yourself at all times matters. If they didn't know that I was a person of integrity and that I was a hard worker and that I understood the boundaries and the lines, and that if they didn't know those things about me, it would be very different. And I would say sometimes you do have to, in life, you have to prove yourself, and that's where living according to your values aligns, and it helps you do those things. And I will say, it's not everything is an immediate yes. We're taught when we're little that sometimes God says yes, no, or maybe. There are 3 answers to prayers. And some of those answers have morphed over time. And you have to be patient. Someone told me recently, and this was an aha for me while I was the book stuff, it hasn't been, just so you know, it hasn't played out exactly like I envisioned. And there was frustration at times. And I was talking about, it was like there was this timeline and it was supposed to do. And my friend said to me, and this was just such wisdom, it didn't work out according to your timeline, because I think there's some stuff God wants you to work out with yourself first. You weren't ready for it when you wanted it to. There are some things that you need to work out. And part of that was trust. Part of that was patience. Part of that are, my motives. It's keeping those in check at all times. And if it's not lining up according to our plans, maybe it's because our plans are not the plans that matter.
Oh, that's good. That's so good. What a wonderful prescription to just check ourselves against what we want versus the God's plan and the perfect plan at work and for what we want in the world. When we talk about activating your voice, and people see women like you who are just doing it all. I mean, like you said on your website, I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a friend, I'm a boss, I'm doing all of these things, and you show up so brave and confident. Were you always that way, or was there a journey? Was that one of the activations to get to that place, to tell this story, or to show up as you do today?
It's funny. I was talking to someone who works for me today about it, because I think we forget that everyone's human and everyone has their own insecurities. And I forget even sometimes, one thing is, as women, as you rise to be a leader and you climb leadership ranks, one of the things you learn is that people are always watching you. And one thing I always have to remember, especially I work in a company where I've been there 20 years. I was here before as an executive producer. Sometimes I think I have a hard time thinking that people don't think of me anything as one of them. But at the end of the day, I'm the boss of the newsroom. And that's lost on me sometimes. Like, I see myself as that person who's questioning what she says sometimes. And that, is a hot, like my husband would tell you, she's a hot mess. You know what I mean? Like, we all have our insecurities. And I think we've got to realize that everybody has their own insecurities. Everybody has their own things that motivate them. That maybe, like, I'm a driver. I am a driver. I am an achiever. One of the things, what does Suzanne do? And when I did my life planning, I win. That's what I do. But do you know what has motivated me most of my life to doing all of those things? It's a people-pleasing addiction. And that's not good. And that's not good. Now, it's part of, God wired me to be an achiever. He wired me to be high capacity. But that's something I've had to work on. And I think, to answer your question is, remember that everybody has their own stuff. No matter how together you think they may be, they all have their own stuff. They all have their own inner dialogue. Everybody has their own struggles. Everybody has their own addictions. Everyone has their own sin strongholds, the strongholds that, that they're constantly struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is minus those things. We're all human. We are all human. And it is okay. We will all be better when we all accept the fact that we are all human. All human.
Oh, that is rich. That is so good too. Like your level of self-awareness is so refreshing, and the honesty about, hey, I know that God made me to be a high achiever, which is why I can live out my faith. I could be bold because I'm just wired to be that. Not everyone finds that naturally. It's a process. But then to follow that up with, but I know that it's rooted in people pleasing too.
Mm-hmm.
I think a part of that, finding your voice, is knowing, like you said, your motives and what is it rooted in. So how do you help others or usher others into that life of living faith at work? You and I talked about that a little bit. It's like, hey, I don't come to work, thumping my Bible and spouting scriptures from the newsroom floor.
Right.
But there is faith in action as people watch you at work. Can you talk about that a bit, Suzanne?
Wow. And how you find the comfort in that. And it's interesting because I've spent most of my career in newsrooms in the Southeast. And I don't know if the Southeast lends to like more of a church culture than like other regions still. So I've never felt like, it's like in an Atlanta newsroom, you're not the only one who goes to church. Like, people
Right.
still go to church, on a Sunday. And that's not the case, in every region sometimes, necessarily. So very, very comfortable, on that level. You have to, I think a lot of that goes to having good relationships outside of work first. You have to have, whenever it comes to your faith in your walk with God and your accountability and your growth, makes me confident. And what keeps me in check to make sure I am on the path are my like-minded brothers and sisters who I have close relationships with outside of work. And in growing with them and them holding me accountable and them building me up and knowing I can call them and tell them anything. And during the pandemic that I can have a Zoom with a discipleship group of women that I was in, and I can just ugly cry about how tired I am. To have those people in my life, and quite frankly, to be confident at work, and especially leading at work and having your voice and to feel good in your skin, I believe you've got to have those relationships outside of work and people not connected to it to feel grounded and confident and know that you are on the right path. If I didn't have that, and if cheerleaders, people who truly know your heart, at work, at the end of the day, we have a job, and my job impacts other people. At the end of the day, they're going to see me as the boss, and they may not like, a decision I had to make that was the right decision for the newsroom and the community, and even them, and they may not see it. So to go home and have that in my personal relationships at home, people who know your intentions are pure, stay on the right path. That's what gives me the confidence. When we talked about my core values and I get off, it's because my relationships outside of work, my relationships with my brothers and sisters and my family and all of that, when those relationships are off, it trickles. They all play a part.
That's so good. Oh my goodness. Hey, if you're listening to this episode, this would be a perfect moment to remind you that activation requires action. Suzanne is sharing just transformational nuggets about how to live out your values in your faith and have a foundation outside of work so that it can translate at work. And what better way to really get these nuggets and hold on to them than to use our affirmation and activation journal. Make sure as you're listening to this episode, you can check out our show notes, download your own free copy of the journal, and follow along with us because we want to take action on all of the nuggets that she's sharing. Again, just look at the show notes. Make sure that you follow Suzanne and also listen along and jot down in the journal the affirmations and the nuggets that she's sharing to live out loud your faith at work and in the world. So I want to shift for a moment, Suzanne. Let's talk about your book, baby. This book. Tell us, you shared a bit about the process of writing the book. Can you share more about the title of the book and the purpose, your audience that you've written the book for?
Yeah, I love how you called it my book baby. It is my book baby. It was, 2021 was a rough year. And what kept me sane was to have that outlet. Mm-hmm. The working title with agents and publishers and stuff, it goes round and round, but to kind of give you a summary of kind of working, it's basically lessons that I wish I would have, life lessons that I wish I would have learned in church. And the focus of it is that in my upbringing, it became very apparent to me I was wired to lead, but leading in the church was not an option for me. And as I became older, there was some resentment because I would see like guys walk into a church and be given opportunities. And the more I grew in leadership outside of the church, I was like, why can I be this high capacity person outside the church, but in the church, I'm kind of pigeonholed. Mm-hmm. And, some of my friends would be like, you know what, it's great. You can reach more people and be an influence in the world more and where you ended up. And that's probably true. And this was part of God's plan, all of that. But I began to reflect on the lessons I learned in a newsroom, the lessons I learned leading. Mm-hmm. I'm like, wouldn't it have been awesome if we talked about some of these lessons inside the church? Mm-hmm. Like, wouldn't it have been awesome if I learned these lessons in a church instead of going away? And at one point in my life, in my early 20s, even falling away and not even being active and involved. And what if I would have learned what if we talked about racial reconciliation in the church more? What if I would have seen women helping women and bringing them up like I did in a newsroom? I'm where I am because of some very strong women in the industry. Women in the church didn't support me like this. Some of the worst things ever said to me were from fellow women in the church. What if I, learned about how, we can look at each other as brothers and sisters in Christ and in human beings and leaders. And we don't have to be caught up in the whole, you're a man, I'm a woman, we can't behave ourselves if we're around each other. Like, what if we talked about what it would be like if we just looked at each other as brothers and sisters in Christ and trying to help each other? What if we really talked about what loving your neighbor really is in the church and who our neighbors really are? Yeah. So the book outlines, it's in different sections about these things that I learned in a newsroom that we didn't talk about in church as much. And how can we really, and then, that sub kind of audience of how can we really empower our girls by talking about those things?
That's good. So I have to ask, given the lessons you've learned at work that you wish you learned in church, do you believe that we are sometimes called to be that representation of the church at work? Because some people may not set foot in the church, and those experiences are greater teachers than maybe what they would have seen otherwise. What do you think?
That's what living the Great Commission is all about, isn't it? I think we would be a better church if we talked about those things in the church. But at the end of the day, it's how we live. It's how I treat someone when they're sick or they've received really bad news.
Mm-hmm.
It's how we have conversations about, is this the greater good decision to make?
Mm-hmm.
It's how we have, in a newsroom, the conversations about, being the voice for the voiceless and helping those in need, which, by the way, is how I believe, journalism and being a Christian completely align. They're not separate at all. They completely align because it's about speaking truth and it's about living in the margins and helping people in the margins.
Mm.
Once people know people know I'm active in my church. They know me well. I'm an open book, as everyone here can probably say. So, it's no secret how I believe. But people pick up on that just by seeing you. They see a difference and they wonder what that difference is.
Mm-hmm.
As we talked about this, I'm not talking about saying, I'm a Christian and you go, around reciting, Bible verses and pull people aside and witness to them. That's not what we're talking about. And it's about how you live. It's about how you treat others. It's about doing the right thing. It's about sometimes making the tough decision, but the right decision, even though people may not understand. Not everybody understood Jesus's decisions all the time. He didn't make everyone happy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it is truly, it's about how you live as an example. And I think for people to see the love, that's what we're supposed to do, is love each other, right?
Mm-hmm. That's so good. Love, it's really at the center of it, that the same love I carry for Christ, I carry in my heart for the people at work, at home, in my community. And when people feel that love, they're like, man, there's something different about that Suzanne. Why is she so nice to me? Why is she so calm under pressure? And they want to know what it is. And I love that. So you mentioned the women who were influences to you in your journalism career. How do you plan to pay it forward and help others activate their voice and live out faith?
The whole, women bringing up women is so interesting. And I see, I think the marketplace is like 2 to 3 decades kind of ahead of many church circles when it comes to this.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that, researchers talk a lot about is that, especially if you go back, a couple decades, probably even a decade ago, there were a certain amount of spots in businesses for women. And you can say that of diverse people as well. Like there was, on every board, every leadership team, there was a certain amount of spots, and women wired to lead were in competition for those spots. And that led to an interesting dynamic where women didn't always help each other. They became real competitive. And then you add that to the fact that, then it's like, well, I figured it out. You can figure it out too. And I think in the marketplace and corporate world and all of those things, we're past that a bit. I think, there are more seats at the table. We've learned in corporate world how important it is to have diversity in the workplace and more seats at the table. And I think a lot of churches are starting to catch on to that. Again, a little behind, but getting there. And so I think the important thing to do for women in faith to do is, I think, for other young women to see that there are women like them. I love to teach upper elementary. And why do I love to teach upper elementary? Because I think it's important for girls, 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, to see someone like me, and boys, by the way, to know that there's someone like me who is their Sunday school teacher. I tell them every city I'm in, whether it be Pittsburgh or, Atlanta or wherever I'm in, I'm teaching, upper elementary. I talk about my job. I say, I'm so-and-so, that person's on TV, like I'm their boss. Like I let them know. And that's not me bragging to a 3rd-year-old that I'm their chief meteorologist boss. It's them seeing that, she's a Christian and she's a woman and she's out there doing it. And I think step one for us to empower young Christian women to be confident in their voice is they have to know there are women like me and you, Melissa.
Mm, that's good. To be an example, representation. We always talk about in marginalized communities about how representation matters. Well, it matters in this instance as well. That's really, really good. So you are now, as we await the release of your book, you're still sharing and pouring out amazing nuggets on your website and in your blog at suzannenadell.com. Tell us about your blog and things you write about um, that just enrich others as we prepare, just to prime us leading up to your book.
Yeah, the blog, I do an entry every Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really kind of along the same lines as the book, just life lessons that I've learned. Everything, what it was like to, navigate holidays as a working mom, and, how I messed up, just being I think it's important for people to realize we all mess up, and nobody gets it totally right all the time. And you're not alone. It took me until my son was in the 5th grade for me to figure out Valentine's Day. And now he doesn't have to have Valentine's anymore at school. I'm like, I nailed it his last year. Yay. I talked about, the lessons, from my cancer journey.
Mm-hmm.
This week I'm posting, we're mid-year, halfway through the year. Don't wait till the end of the year to check in on your goals from the beginning of the year, or what your word of the year was. Where are you right now? Celebrate your successes, and where do you need to, pivot later? Things like one upcoming, a little tease for what's coming up here soon, is I was challenged to put my scales away for a year and see where I
Oh.
am in a year, only weigh myself when I go to a doctor's appointment, because of what we as women may let that do. And am I truly listening to my body to take care of my body, or am I listening to my body to manipulate my body to do what I want it to do?
Wow.
So it's tied in some of the lessons that we talk about in the book, some other lessons. It's inspirational, a little thought-provoking, kind of targeted, but not just for moms, not just for working women. I was actually, my boss told me, he's like, I know your target audience is women, but it's an easy read and I find it enjoyable. So I'm like, no, thank you.
Well, okay. So here's the tip. Whenever someone's writing something for women, guys, that's an inside scoop on how to know the mind of a woman. Ladies, if someone's writing something for men, that's an inside scoop. It might be for you too to read that. So it's just a good tip to understand how we think and how we relate to each other. So, as we wrap up our conversation here, I would like to know what the future looks like for Suzanne Nadell, and how will you continue here forward to live out your faith at work and in the world too.
Wow, the future for me. So I currently have discovered that I have a passion in writing and speaking, and that there are other women like me. I feel very led for women like me to know we're not alone.
Mm.
And by women like me, I mean, women who are out there trying to do it all. And by the way, we're all kind of trying to do it all the time, aren't we?
Yeah, just a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I still find joy in, the news world.
Mhm.
So for me, it's the living in both worlds, which I believe is where God has called me to be right now.
Mhm.
To continue to serve my community, to continue to not just serve my community in Atlanta, to serve other like-minded Christian women who want to grow and figure it out, through the ways we can do that, through speaking, through the writing, through sharing their ideas, and just letting them know that they're not alone. None of us are
That's
alone.
That's so good. So I have to share with you, Suzanne, here at the Activation Hour, we have our activation affirmations, which again you can find in the back of our free episode journal. Um, and those 20 affirmations, you remind me of this specific one. I'm going to read it to you, and I want to know your thoughts when you hear these words. It says, "My voice will reach all that I am called to serve. My voice will reach all who I am called to serve." What does that mean to you when you hear our activation affirmation this week?
My voice will reach all who I am called to serve. What immediately came to mind was I have a friend who's worked in the radio world in Atlanta and also mentors women. And she said, Suzanne, don't let anyone put you in a box.
Mm.
God has you where you were, to be paraphrasing. She's like, God has you. And I remember we were having lunch and she's like, in both areas for a reason. And don't let anyone put you in a box because God doesn't want you in a box.
So good. So good. Don't put yourself or your voice in a box because your voice will reach all that you're called to serve. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for your time this afternoon, the Activation Hour. It's been a treat to have you. You are welcome here anytime, and we will be excitedly awaiting the release of your upcoming book. And guys, Activation Nation, you know how we do. We have to support those who come to our community. Make sure that you check out the show notes. Also, if you want to see my journal notes from today's episode, make sure you subscribe to our email list as I share on the blog my thoughts and takeaways from today's conversation with Suzanne Nadell. Also, check her out, read the blog, and subscribe to her newsletter as well at SuzanneNadell.com. Suzanne, anywhere else where you would like for us to follow and stay connected with your journey?
Instagram at Suznadell, at SUZNADELL. I update that frequently.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Hey guys, if this was a blessing to you and you feel activated after this episode, don't be stingy. Share this information. Be sure to turn on notifications to know when we share episodes on our YouTube channel, as well as subscribe to your favorite podcast platform so you can listen to my conversation with Suzanne and all of those I've brought on to have our conversation this season about accepting influence. Be sure to share this with someone else and journal. And by the way, if you want to share your own activation story, leave me a voice memo. You never know. You might hear your voice on the next episode. I'm your girl, Melissa D., your activation coach. Again, joined with this week's guest, Suzanne Nadell, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
If you love this episode, please make sure to subscribe, turn on your notifications, and share with a friend. Also, if you really want to get behind the scenes, go now to our YouTube channel at The Activation Hour. The link is found in the show notes for you to actually see my guest live and in person, and to even catch more details of our conversation behind the scenes. Stay connected and join us next time for The Activation Hour, Purpose at Work and in the World.